The main corridor of the Raleigh Convention Center was 30 feet from where Desiree was standing when she saw it happen. She had been going over her notes for the opening remarks. Vantage Group was the lead sponsor. Her name was on the program. She had 11 minutes before the program director would call her to the stage. She was on the third paragraph when her eyes moved, the way eyes sometimes move in a room full of motion, and she stopped reading. 2 security guards were approaching a man near the registration tables. The man was tall, wearing a gray work shirt with a company logo on the chest. He had a child with him, a girl of about 8, backpack on, a hardcover book pressed to her side. She watched him listen to the guard. He did not step back. He stood exactly where he was, asked one question, received an answer, and turned toward the girl without another word. He crouched down, said something. The girl nodded. He picked up her book, gathered her backpack, put his hand on her shoulder, and walked her toward the exit. He did not look back. The program director was calling her name. She let her assistant guide her toward the stage. She said the right things into the microphone and smiled at the right moments, but not before she had noted the logo on the back of the man's gray shirt, the small orange diamond of Carlisle Structural Solutions, one of the subcontractors currently active on Vantage Tower. When she walked back down, she turned to her assistant before he could speak. The man who was just removed. I want the official reason. 15 minutes. Outside the convention center, the late morning sun was pressing down on the concrete plaza. Garrett Ashby found a bench near a low planter and sat down, and Corvin sat beside him without being asked, already opening her book across her knees. She had been on the same chapter about suspension bridges for 3 days, not because it was hard, but because she kept returning to the diagrams. The cables, the towers, the way load distributed across the span. She wanted to understand it, not just read past it. Is it because someone doesn't like you? She asked, without looking up. Garrett looked at her. Someone's afraid of me, he said. She considered this the way she considered most things, quietly, without rushing. Then she nodded and went back to her book. Inside his chest, the calculation was already running. He had recognized Marcus Webb the moment he saw him near the East Corridor. Webb had been with the OSHA regional office in Raleigh for 9 years, and Garrett had seen his name on enough compliance documents during his time at Meridian Structural to recognize the man by his badge lanyard alone. They had exchanged maybe 40 words before the guards arrived. Garrett hadn't said anything that mattered yet. He hadn't told Webb about the steal. He hadn't mentioned the filing. But Harlan Speck had seen them talking. And Harlan Speck didn't need to know what had been said. He only needed to know what could be said. That was the thing about fear. It responded to possibility, not fact. Garrett took out his phone. He opened his notes app and typed the name, the office, the badge number he had read off Webb's lanyard, while the guard was explaining that a formal complaint had been filed by a Vantage Group representative. He typed the guard's name. He typed the time. A Vantage Group representative. Not a specific name. Not a specific complaint. His phone buzzed. Nolan Crew's name on the screen. I saw the whole thing, Nolan said, without greeting. I was by the east entrance. I saw who made the call. A pause. You want me to do something? This was different. In 2 years of knowing what Nolan knew and saying nothing, the man had never once offered first. Garrett noted it. Watch, Garrett said. Write down what you saw. Don't do anything else yet. Okay. You still inside? Yeah. Stay there. He hung up and looked at Corvin, who had found the page she wanted and was now tracing one of the cable diagrams with her finger, following the line from the anchor point up to the tower and back down the other side. Ba. She said the one word that had stayed, the Vietnamese word for father that she had simply always used for him, that neither of them had ever discussed or explained. How do they figure out how thick the cables have to be? He leaned over and looked at the diagram. He told her. He explained the relationship between the load and the cable cross-section, and why the angle of the cables mattered as much as their thickness, and how the towers had to be engineered to handle forces from both directions at once. He told her all of it in plain language because she was 8 and she preferred that to being talked down to. His voice was level. His hand was still holding the phone. Corvin worked through the explanation carefully, tracing the cables as he described them. She asked one follow-up question. He answered it. She went back to reading, satisfied. Inside the convention center, on the upper level above the main corridor, a particular set of lights stayed on through the lunch hour and well into the afternoon. Dessa Wren did not eat lunch that day. Her assistant returned inside 12 minutes. The formal removal request had come from a Vantage Group email address, specifically from the account of Harlan Speck's executive assistant, Mitchell Rourke. The request had not passed through Dessa's office. It had not passed through legal. It had not passed through anyone whose job it was to authorize the use of Vantage Group's name in communications with third-party event organizers. She read the email chain. It was brief and official, and cited a vague violation of exhibitor conduct standards. It bore no specific accusation. It bore the Vantage name. She did not give it to legal. Instead, she spent 20 minutes locating Marcus Webb, who was still in the building. She found him near the Materials Innovation Pavilion on the East End, finishing a conversation with two engineers from a firm she recognized. She waited until they'd finished. She introduced herself. She asked if he had a few minutes. He did. What Webb told her, in the measured language of a man who chose his words the way other people chose their tools, was that an anonymous complaint had been filed with the OSHA regional office 6 weeks prior, referencing structural steel at the Vantage Tower site. The complaint was under active review. He was not at liberty to discuss specifics. He had not spoken with the individual who filed it. He confirmed that attending industry events was a routine part of his work, and that he had spoken with a number of people over the course of the day, none of whom had raised anything of substance regarding the filing. Dessa thanked him. She walked back to the small office the convention center had provided for her use, sat down at the table, and opened her laptop. Garrett Ashby. She typed the name into the professional licensing database first, a structural engineering license, issued to Garrett James Ashby, current status active, renewed through the following calendar year. She cross-referenced with the state contractor registry. Then she pulled the employment history available through the Engineering Society's professional directory. Meridian Structural Solutions, Senior Structural Engineer. Start date January 2016. End date September 2022. No termination reason listed. The absence of a reason was itself a kind of information. She pulled Meridian's public filings from that period and cross-referenced the board advisors. The name appeared in the 2021 annual report and again in 2022, listed under Strategic Consultants, Harlan Speck. She closed the laptop and sat with what she now understood. Harlan hadn't removed a stranger from this event. He had removed the one person in the building who had both the technical knowledge to understand exactly what was wrong with the steel going into Vantage Tower and a documented history of having already tried to stop it once before. The one person who, if he spent 20 more minutes talking to Marcus Webb, might hand OSHA everything it needed. He had not done this because the removal would solve the problem. He had done it because every hour of delay was an hour he could use. That evening, Dessa drove to the address listed in the subcontractor registry for Ashby Structural Drafting, a converted garage in a neighborhood of older bungalows in southeast Raleigh. The light was on. She knocked. Garrett opened the door and looked at her for a moment before he spoke. His expression did not change in the way most people's expressions changed when a CEO appeared on their steps unannounced and without explanation. "Did you find Webb first?" he said, "or me first?" "Webb first," she said. He stepped back and held the door open. She walked in. The space was clean and organized in the way that only people who think spatially tend to organize things: drawings, sorted by project in labeled flat files, reference books, arranged by subject, the work table clear, except for the current job. A single drafting light, angled over a set of structural calculations that she could read well enough to know they were not simple work. Garrett pulled 3 folders from the flat file and set them on the table. He did not explain what they were. He let her read. The first was an internal Meridian report from August of 2022, 12 pages comparing certified steel specifications against actual measured properties of the delivered material. The yield strength fell below the ASTM A36 standard by a margin that, at Vantage Tower's height and load conditions, represented a meaningful structural risk. The second folder contained his records from this year. The same supplier, the same discrepancies, the same steel, 2 years later, still going into the same building. The third held his OSHA filing with the case reference number. "You filed in April," she said. "April 14th. You've been working for Carlisle on this project since when?" "March 3rd. She looked up. "You took the job knowing you'd find this." He didn't confirm or deny that. He said, "I filed what I found." She looked at him for a long moment. He was watching her the way engineers watched load-bearing calculations, not impatiently, but waiting for the result to resolve. "You have a PE license," she said. "You have the documentation. You have the filing." She paused, letting the next part settle. "Harlan didn't take any of those things from you in 2022. What he took was the ability to use them. He put a story into the industry that made anyone who might have hired you afraid to let your name on a project." Garrett said nothing. But something in his posture, some very slight shift, barely visible, told her that no one had put that particular sentence together in his presence before. "What do you need?" she said, "for me to be able to do this correctly?" He looked at the folders, then at her. "What are you willing to do?" he asked. It was the right question. She hadn't fully answered it yet herself. Nolan Crew arrived 40 minutes later with a paper bag from the sandwich place 2 blocks away and a manila envelope. He set the food on the corner of the table, without asking, and laid out 3 documents. An internal Meridian Quality Control report from February of 2022 that should not have existed in his possession, but did because Nolan had a habit of printing things he didn't understand and filing them. A screenshot of an email chain forwarded into the site crew group chat by mistake, captured on his phone before the recall went out, and photographs he had taken 2 weeks ago of steel beam identification stamps at the site serial numbers that did not match the certified documentation on file. "I didn't know what to do with them," Nolan said, looking at the table. "I knew what they meant. I just didn't know what to do." Dessa looked at all 3. "Your name doesn't appear in anything I file," she said to Nolan. "Not until there's enough on record to protect you. That I can guarantee." Nolan nodded. His right hand tapped 3 times with the first 3 fingers, a brief unconscious rhythm that stopped as soon as it started. Dessa closed the folder. "I'm not going to promise you a specific outcome, but I will read every document in these folders before I make any decision. I will not hand this to someone else to manage, and whatever I do, I will do it on the record." She picked up her bag. "That's what I can offer." Garrett looked at her. "That's enough," he said. She drove home along the river road, the city lights moving past the window. She had 7 calls she hadn't returned, and a board briefing scheduled for 8 the following morning. She thought about what Garrett had not said, which was considerable. 2 days later, Harlan Speck called a meeting with his assistant and delivered a single instruction. The email that had been forwarded to the site crew group chat in error was to be deleted from the system. Mitchell Rourke deleted it within the hour. He did not know the deletion would be logged by the server, and he did not know that Nolan had already captured the message on his personal phone before the recall went out. That same afternoon, Harlan arranged individual conversations with 3 members of the Vantage board. He did not hold a group meeting. Group meetings allowed people to compare reactions. Individual conversations allowed him to calibrate. He told each of them a version of the same story, that Dessa was allowing a personal connection to influence her judgment on a matter with significant legal exposure for the company, that the appropriate course was to route the matter through legal counsel, and that the board had a fiduciary responsibility to ensure the investigation, if there was to be one, was conducted without the appearance of bias. He used the word fiduciary twice per conversation. He used the phrase personal connection 3 times. He watched each board member's face carefully and adjusted the emphasis depending on what he saw. Harlan Speck had spent 18 years in that building, learning which concerns made which people want to act cautiously, and he was very good at reading the difference between someone who was persuaded and someone who was merely unsettled. Unsettled was enough. Unsettled people asked questions and delayed decisions, and delay was what he needed. That same week, Garrett's last remaining drafting contract was terminated by email. The message was short and professional and cited a change in project scope. He had seen this before, the careful language that left no legal opening, the kind of ending that was designed to look like a business decision and was something else entirely. It was the third contract he had lost in 6 weeks. He did some arithmetic in his head. He had a little under 3 months of financial runway before the numbers stopped working. He forwarded the termination notice to a folder on his desktop where he kept records of things he might need later. Then he went back to the drawings on his table and worked until midnight. Garrett received an email that Wednesday from a law firm he had never contacted, informing him that any continued communication with Vantage Group personnel regarding his former employment at Meridian Structural or his current subcontract work at Vantage Tower could constitute tortious interference with business relations and would be met with appropriate legal action. He read it twice. He had received a letter with similar architecture in October of 2022, 3 weeks after Meridian terminated his contract. He knew what this kind of letter was designed to do: make a person feel isolated and overextended, suggest that the legal mechanism was already in motion, make continuing feel more expensive than stopping. He scanned it and sent it to Dessa with a single line. "So you know where he is in the process." She received it at 6:47 in the evening, read it in the elevator, and called her personal attorney from the car. The conversation took 18 minutes. The attorney's conclusion was clear. Dessa's legal exposure for failing to act on documented evidence of a structural safety violation was substantially greater than her exposure for an appearance of personal involvement in the investigation. The path forward was the path forward. She sent Garrett a message at 8:13. "Spoke with my attorney. We continue. Not I'll help you. Not I'm on your side. We continue." 2 words that drew a line around both of them, without making it something he hadn't asked for. She was passing the Vantage Tower site on her way home when she saw the lights of the drafting studio still on. She had a technical question about load distribution in the Section 6 drawings that she hadn't been able to resolve from the documents alone. That was the reason she gave herself for stopping. Garrett was at the drafting table when she knocked, and Corvin was beside him on a tall stool, her own book open next to his drawings. The girl looked up when Dessa came in, and did not seem particularly surprised. "You're the lady from the expo," Corvin said. "You were looking at my dad when all the other people were looking at the stage." Dessa stopped. "You noticed that?" "You were the only one," Corvin said, as though this were simply a piece of navigational information. She looked back down at her book. Garrett met Dessa's eyes briefly across the room. He said nothing. She sat down and asked her technical question. Garrett answered it. And then they kept talking, the way conversations sometimes continue past the point that made them necessary. And Corvin occasionally looked up to ask whether a particular diagram was accurate, and Garrett would tell her yes, or explain where the simplification was. Around 9 o'clock, Corvin fell asleep on the small couch in the corner with her book open on her chest. Garrett got up and moved the book to the table without waking her. He poured 2 cups of coffee without asking, and set one in front of Dessa. She told him about her father. She didn't plan to. She was looking at one of the drawings pinned to the wall, a section detail for a cantilever connection, and she said that her father had been a structural engineer too, that he had built the company before she was born, that he had died when she was 15 and left her the company and a name she had spent the next 20 years deciding what to do with. She said she had rebuilt it not because she was ambitious, but because she couldn't let it become something he wouldn't have recognized. She said she was aware that there was something complicated about that, spending your life protecting someone else's idea of what a thing should be, and that she had not fully resolved it. Garrett listened. He did not fill the silence with reassurance or interpretation. After a while he said, "My father died when I was 17. I joined the army partly because of that." He said it simply, as a fact. The way he said most things. It was the first personal information he had offered that she hadn't asked for. They sat without speaking for a while after that. Her phone lit up on the table with a notification from the OSHA case management portal. The case had been updated to reflect formal investigation status, which meant, among other things, that the name of the complainant was now part of the official record. She called Garrett immediately, even though he was 3 feet away, He picked up and looked at her across the table. "Harlan's going to know your name by morning," she said. "I know. Did you know this would happen when you agreed to let me contact Webb?" He set down his coffee cup. "I knew the timeline. I filed anonymous in April to give the review process time to develop before Harlan could move to suppress it. Once it went to formal investigation, the complainant's identity becomes part of the record. I had maybe 4 weeks after that before it would be logged." He looked at her. "I calculated I'd need about that long." She was quiet for a moment. "You knew. And you didn't tell me. You didn't ask about the timeline. You asked about the documents. That's not the same thing." "No," he said. "It isn't." She thought about that on the drive home. There was something in it. She recognized the reflex to manage information, to give people only what they'd asked for and not what they might need. She had done it herself, with the board, with Webb. She wasn't certain she had standing to be bothered by it. But she was, a little. And that, she decided, was also information. The mediation session was held on a Tuesday morning in a conference room at a law firm in downtown Raleigh. Harlan's attorneys had requested it as a preliminary step before any formal legal proceedings, a standard move when you wanted to establish a narrative before the record was created. Garrett was there with his attorney. Dessa was there with hers. Harlan sat at the far end of the table with 2 partners from his firm and did not look at Garrett when he came in. The opening presentation from Harlan's side was efficient. A clip, 40 seconds long, pulled from the convention center's security footage. In the clip, Garrett was visible near the registration tables, speaking with a security officer posture forward, hands moving. The clip ended. The removal was a reasonable security response to escalating behavior, Harlan's attorney said. Dessa's attorney set down her pen. "We'd like to request, through discovery, the complete security footage from all cameras covering the main corridor and the adjacent registration area for the period between 2 p.m. and 3 p.m. on the date in question." There was a pause. "That's a broad request," said Harlan's attorney. "It's a specific time window," said Dessa's attorney. "We'll wait." The session was recessed for 48 hours. When the footage came, Dessa watched it alone, every camera angle, in sequence. The convention center's system covered 7 distinct positions in the relevant area. She started with the camera mounted above the east entrance to the registration area, angled toward the corridor. At 14:23 and 7 seconds, a man in a dark jacket was visible near the exhibitor services desk, phone to his ear, his free hand extended in the direction of the registration tables. The man was Mitchell Rourke, Harlan Speck's assistant. The timestamp was 14:23 and 7 seconds. The security officer reached Garrett at 14:23 and 41 seconds. The clip Harlan's attorneys had submitted began at 14:24 and 4 seconds. Dessa watched it a second time to be certain she had read the timestamps correctly. Then she called her attorney. When the session reconvened, the full footage was presented on a screen at the end of the conference room. No one spoke during playback. Harlan did not look at the screen. His attorney made a note on a legal pad. When the lights came back up, Harlan's lead attorney requested an adjournment to consult with his client. The session ended without resolution. But resolution was no longer the question. That evening, Garrett was at the drafting table when Nolan called to tell him how it had gone. He listened without interrupting. When Nolan finished, Garrett asked one question. The camera angle she used, did she pull just that feed? Or everything? Everything, Nolan said. She told IT she wanted the complete system output for the window, not a selected pull. She knew what she was looking for before she asked for it. Garrett was quiet. He thought about the difference between someone who gets lucky and someone who understands which questions lead to useful answers. He thought about Dessa in that conference room, sitting through 40 seconds of edited footage and saying, before seeing anything else, "We'd like the complete record." She hadn't reacted. She had anticipated. He sat with the folders for a while after the call. He looked at the drawings on his table and thought about how long it had been since his name had been on any of them. The OSHA regional office issued its findings on a Thursday morning. The structural steel installed at the Vantage Tower site, in the sections covering floors 12 through 22, did not meet ASTM A36 specifications. A stop work order was issued effective immediately. The case was referred to the Department of Labor's Office of Inspector General for review of the procurement records. This was not a discretionary step when OSHA findings indicated potential procurement fraud above a threshold of $1 million. Referral to the OIG was mandatory. The OIG, in reviewing Meridian Steel's invoicing against the installed material records, identified a discrepancy of $2.3 million between what had been billed and what had actually been delivered to the site. That discrepancy, and the pattern of payments associated with it, exceeded the threshold requiring coordination with federal law enforcement. The FBI's Raleigh field office opened a parallel investigation. Meridian Steel's financial records were subpoenaed within the week. Dessa received the OSHA findings at 7:42 in the morning. She read them at her desk before her assistant arrived. She read the stop work order twice. She read the OIG referral language carefully, because she wanted to understand exactly what she was carrying into a board meeting before she walked into one. She wanted to know every number, every statute, every implication that anyone in that room might raise. She called an emergency session for 2 o'clock. The conference room on the 14th floor held 7 board members and smelled like the coffee no one was drinking. Dessa placed the OSHA findings and the preliminary OIG summary on the table and said only, "I think you should read these before we discuss anything." She sat down. She waited. The room was quiet for 4 minutes. She had counted on 4 minutes. Harlan Speck sat at his usual position, third from the left. He did not pick up the documents. He had seen the OSHA notification that morning and had spent the intervening hours in his attorney's office. He knew what the document said. He sat with his hands flat on the table and looked at the wall across the room, and for the first time in 18 years inside that building, he did not have a version of events prepared for whoever spoke first. The vote to suspend him, pending the outcome of the federal investigation, was 6-1 with 1 abstention. He stood when the result was called. He buttoned his jacket. 18 years in that building, and he walked out of the room without saying a word. And the door closed behind him, and the room stayed very quiet for several seconds after that. Dessa remained in her seat until the other board members had filed out. Then she sat alone in the conference room for a few minutes, not reviewing anything, not preparing for the next item. Just sitting. Outside the 14th floor windows, Raleigh was going about its afternoon. She called Garrett at 5:37. "It's done," she said. There was a pause on his end. "Has the steel been replaced?" "Not yet. The stop work order is in place. Remediation starts next week." "Then it's not done." She almost smiled. "No," she said. "I suppose it isn't." A silence settled between them, not uncomfortable, the kind that meant something was being understood without being stated. "Are you all right?" she asked. "I'm repainting the exterior door on the studio," he said. "Corvin's helping." She looked out the window of her office at the city going amber in the late afternoon and thought about a man and his daughter painting a door on the day a 2-year problem had finally started to resolve. She thought about how ordinary that was, and how right it was. "Garrett," she said. "Yeah." She didn't say the rest of it. Not yet. But she stayed on the line a little longer than the conversation required. 2 days after the suspension, before the formal indictment that would come 6 weeks later, before his attorneys had restricted his communications with anyone connected to the case, Harlan Speck sent a text message to Garrett's phone. It came at 11:43 in the evening. The message was 1 paragraph. "I don't expect you to understand this, or to accept it. I'm not asking for either. I want you to know that what I did in 2022 wasn't because of you specifically. The system had allowed it before. I assumed it would allow it again. That's not a defense. It's just the truth, and I thought you deserved to have it rather than a version I'd shaped to make myself look better than I am. I'm sorry for what it cost you." Garrett read it twice. He put his phone face down on the work table. He looked at the current set of drawings for a while, the kind of looking that isn't really about what you're looking at. Then he picked the phone back up and read it one more time. He didn't reply. He didn't delete it. He sat with it overnight. He sat with the fact that the person who had cost him 2 years of his professional life had written those words without trying to dress them up. He didn't know exactly what to do with that, but he didn't think the answer was to act like the message wasn't there. In the morning, he drove to the Vantage Group offices. The receptionist called up to Dessa's floor. He waited in a chair near the window for 4 minutes, watching traffic move on the street below. He thought about the last time he had sat in a corporate lobby and whether it had felt like this. It hadn't. It had felt like waiting to be told something. This felt like the other thing. Dessa came down herself, which he hadn't expected. She crossed the lobby and stopped a few feet from him and waited. He said, "I read through the contract again. The terms are right. I want to sign it." He paused. "But I need to say something first." She didn't move. She waited. "In 2022, he said, when Meridian let me go, I thought the problem was that I'd been alone, that there hadn't been anyone who could have stood on the same side as me and actually done something about it. I told myself that was just how it was." He looked at her. "I didn't know that was something that could exist. I want you to know that I know now." Dessa held his gaze. She didn't look away. "Come upstairs," she said. "I have a pen." He signed the contract in her office, at the corner of her desk. She countersigned it without changing a word. That afternoon, Nolan found Garrett at the studio and said, without preamble, "You're standing outside an open door." Garrett looked up from the drawings. "I'm not telling you what to do," Nolan said. "I'm just telling you what I see. Because I've been watching you do this for 2 years, and I'm tired of watching it." He picked up the sandwich he'd brought and sat down. "That's it. That's the whole thing I had to say." Garrett didn't answer, but he didn't go back to the drawings either. 1 week after the signing, Dessa sent 2 things to Garrett's business address without advance notice. The first was a formal confirmation of the structural engineering consultation agreement with the scope and reporting structure he had proposed, as signed. The second was a communication on Vantage Group letterhead, addressed to the relevant parties in the regional engineering and construction industry, summarizing the findings of the federal investigation and formally correcting the record regarding the termination of Garrett Ashby's position at Meridian Structural Solutions in 2022. The letter did not editorialize. It stated the established facts and let them stand. He called her the afternoon it went out. "You didn't ask me first," he said. "Because if I'd asked," she said, "you would have told me you didn't need it." He looked at the letter on his work table. "You don't know that." "I know enough," she said. One of the 7 board members found Dessa in the corridor outside her office that same afternoon and said, with the careful neutrality of someone who had chosen their words in advance, that the decision to distribute a public communication correcting the record on a private individual's employment history without board consultation was the kind of action that could be perceived as personal rather than institutional, that it created a question about whose interests she was serving. Dessa looked at him. She thought about the question. She did not tell him he was wrong. She did not explain that she had weighed carefully, or that the balance had come out clearly on one side, or that the institutional and the personal were pointing in exactly the same direction, and she saw no obligation to pretend otherwise. She said, "I understand the concern," and went back into her office. She sat at her desk for a long time. The board member wasn't entirely wrong. There was a personal element. She had stopped trying to pretend otherwise, at least to herself, but she had made her choice in that corridor, in that conversation, when she declined to apologize for doing something she believed was right. Not on an evening at a drafting studio when the mood was quiet and Corvin was asleep in the corner. Here, in this building, on this day, when it cost something, 6 weeks after the suspension, the North Carolina Department of Justice filed charges against Harlan Speck on 2 counts, procurement fraud under state statute and federal wire fraud under Title 18 of the United States Code. Meridian Steel entered into a cooperation agreement with federal prosecutors. The Vantage Tower remediation was completed, the new steel certified by an independent inspection firm, and the stop work order lifted on a Wednesday morning in November. 3 companies in the regional construction industry contacted Garrett's office within 2 weeks of the letter going out. 2 of them wanted to discuss potential projects. The third wanted to know if he was available as a peer reviewer on a current job. He took all 3 calls. He did not mention the previous 2 years. Nolan Crew was formally appointed to the position of Quality Control Lead for the Vantage Group Construction Division, a position that had not previously existed, which Dessa created, and which carried with it the authority to halt work on any active site for safety review, without escalation required. He received the offer letter by email on a Thursday and called Garrett from the parking lot of the job site. "Did you know she was going to do this?" he asked. "No," Garrett said. There was a silence on the line. "Not the uncomfortable kind." "I'm going to screw this up," Nolan said. "You're going to tap your fingers on your desk a lot," Garrett said. "But you won't screw it up." Nolan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "The letter she sent, I got a copy because my name's in the acknowledgments section. I didn't know that was going to be there either." Garrett looked at the drawing on his table. "Neither did I," he said. 8 months after the day Garrett and Corvin had been walked out of the Carolina Architecture and Construction Expo, the annual event returned to the Raleigh Convention Center on a Thursday in late May. The guest list for this year's event included, among the featured professionals, Garrett James Ashby, structural engineering consultant, Vantage Group. His name was printed in the program. His badge, collected at the registration desk that morning, read structural engineer in the line below his name. He and Corvin arrived at 10 in the morning. She was wearing her good sneakers and carrying the same hardcover book on suspension bridges she'd had with her the year before, the spine creased now from a year of use, a corner of the page about load distribution still folded down where she'd turned it back too many times. They went in through the main entrance. The registration tables were in the same location as last year. The same patterned carpet, the same glass cases with architectural models lit from below. Garrett walked through the entrance and across the corridor, and he knew exactly where he was in relation to where he had stood when the guards had come, and he did not break stride. Corvin was reading as she walked, which she had been specifically asked not to do, which she did anyway. Dessa was already inside. She had arrived early, without an assistant, without a prepared itinerary. She had been looking at the scale models in the East Pavilion when she saw them come through the main entrance. She walked over. Corvin saw her first and stopped walking, stopped reading, which was rarer. She looked at Dessa's badge, then at her father's badge, then up at her father's face. "Bah," she said. She pointed at his badge. She read it out loud, slowly. The way she read things, she was making sure she understood. "Structural engineer." He looked down at her. "You're an engineer?" she said. He looked at her for a moment. Then he looked at Dessa. Then he looked back at his daughter. "Yes," he said. "I am." Corvin processed this. It clearly reorganized something in her understanding of the world, though she didn't say exactly what. She looked at the badge once more. Then she took Dessa's hand in one of hers and her father's hand in the other and said, in the practical tone of a person managing logistics, "Okay, let's go look at the bridges." She pulled them both forward. Dessa looked at Garrett over the top of Corvin's head. He was already looking at her. Neither of them said anything. There was nothing that needed to be said. The girl led them into the pavilion where the scale models stood on their pedestals, each one lit from below, and the morning light came through the high windows and fell across the room, and they went in together. The little girl had said it like it was the most obvious thing in the world, and walking through that door, with his name on a badge and his daughter's hand in his, and Dessa beside him for the first time in a long time, Garrett thought maybe it was.